For more, let's bring in former acting DHS Secretary from Trump's first term and Executive Director of the America First Policy Institute, Chad Wolf. Thank you for joining us, Chad. So, one thing that we often forget to talk about is the amazing amount of red tape and costs that are, of course, are wind up being borne by taxpayers that Donald Trump managed to clear away. But then when Joe Biden came into office, I mean, he came back with a vengeance with all of that stuff. And I think that there is not an American today who isn't suffering under that kind of weight.
Well, I think you're right. I think the overregulation, the regulation and then overregulation that we see throughout the federal government, not just at the Department of Homeland Security, but throughout the government, I think is a big issue. President Trump tackled that during his first term. They'll tackle it again during his second term. And the idea here is to actually, unleash the businesses to do what they can do, the private sector to continue to innovate and make sure that the regulations that we do have in place that federal agencies use are the ones that are needed. And we just don't have what you called, the red tape and the bureaucracy just to have it, just to give federal employees something to do, but that the regulations are in place for the safety and the security of the American people. And I think that's what they'll focus on here just in a couple of days.
I was taken aback, Chad, when I heard Senator Rand Paul say, we asked the Homeland Security, we just want an accounting of all of the collaborations and task force that you're involved in, and they simply don't have any idea. You oversaw Homeland Security. Roughly how many people working there need to get fired, need to get canned? I'm serious, how much fat and waste could be cut in terms of head count, in terms of dollars?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the department needs to get back to its core mission. And obviously it was created after 9/11. I think over the last 20 or so years, it has veered off of its core mission and what we call mission creep, right? It kind of takes on more and more in a life of itself. And so that's where you find that fat, that bureaucracy, the wasted hours out of the day where it's not actually trying to protect the homeland and its people. And so I think it's really important what Senator Rand Paul talked about. The department knows this information. I think we saw that for 4 years under President Biden and Harris and Secretary Mayorkas not being transparent with the American people, much less Congress. But with the American people, they chose to withhold information from them because I think in their heart of hearts, they knew that maybe they weren't doing things that the American people would like. And so obviously they're not going to share that. I think that's going to be we're going to have a new 4 years under a Trump administration. We're going to have a president that communicates very directly with the American people and a secretary and others at the department that are putting the American people's interest first. And they're going to be very clear about what their priorities are and what they're going to do.
One of the most amazing aspects of all this is how utterly incompetent Democrats are, even though they're the party of big government, but then their big government can't get anything done. DHS nominee Kristi Noem today absolutely shellacked Dick Blumenthal when he started asking her about the family separation at the border. And she pointed out that, of course, the Biden administration has managed to lose tens of thousands of children, most likely to human traffickers. And he had no answer for it.
Listen to this.
Senator, the Trump administration never had a family separation policy. They had a zero tolerance policy, which said that our laws would be followed. What I'm alarmed by is the over 300,000 children that went missing during the Biden administration. This administration's lack of desire to find out where those children are or what they may be going through is alarming to me. So I want to stop that.
Because my time is expiring, I'm just going to interrupt again with apologies to say, let's put aside.
Well, I can't put aside 340,000 children.
Labels. Let's put aside what happened in the past.
So suddenly he didn't want to talk about what had happened in the past.
It's amazing, Democrats and those that continue want to bring up zero tolerance, what happened in 2018, that many years ago, but they want to continue to ignore what happened over the last 4 years of this administration. They have lost all credibility on this issue. I think they're showing to the American people that they care less about these children than they do about politics, and making sure that they continue to try to remind the American people of an unpopular policy during the first Trump. It's all they have. It's all they have when we talk about the policies of Homeland Security and what Donald Trump ran on. The American people like his vision. It's why they put him in office. They expect results when the new team gets in place. And for Democratic members to continue to bring up issues that even their own team, in this case, the Biden-Harris team, failed miserably on, I think it just shows you their true colors.
Amen, Chad Wolf. Great to see you, sir. Thank you,
Yeah.
Chad Wolf.
Thanks.